Hello, welcome back. We are on chapter 7 of The Magician's Nephew in the Chronicles of Narnia series. And this chapter is called What Happened at the Front Door. Now, slave, how long am I to wait for my chariot? Thundered the witch. Uncle Andrew cowered away from her. Now that she was really present, all the silly thoughts he had while looking at himself in the glass were oozing out of him. But Aunt Letty at once got up from her knees and came over to the centre of the room. "And who is this young person, Andrew, may I ask?" said Aunt Letty in icy tones. "Distinguished foreigner. Very, very important person," he stammered. "Rubbish," said Aunt Letty, and then turning to the witch, "Get out of my house this moment, you shameless hussy, or I'll send for the police." She thought the witch must be someone out of a circus, and she did not approve of bare arms. "What woman is this?" said Jadis. "Down on your knees, minion, before I blast you." "No strong language in this house, if you please, young woman," said Aunt Letty. Instantly, as it seemed to Uncle Andrew, the Queen towered up to even greater height. Fire flashed from her eyes. She flung out her arm with the same gesture and the same horrible-sounding words that had lately turned the palace gates of Shan to dust. But nothing happened, except Aunt Letty, thinking that these horrible words were meant to be in ordinary English, said, "I thought as much. The woman is drunk. Drunk! She can't even speak clearly." It must have been a terrible moment for the witch when she suddenly realised that her power of turning people into dust, which had been quite real in her own world, was not going to work in ours. But she did not lose her nerve even for a second. Without wasting a thought on her disappointment, she lunged forward and caught Aunt Letty round the neck and the knees and raised her high above her head as if she'd been no heavier than a doll, and then she threw her across the room. While Aunt Letty was still hurtling through the air, the housemaid, who was having a beautifully exciting morning, put her head in at the door and said, "If you please, sir, the hansom's come." "Lead on, slave," said the witch to Uncle Andrew. He began muttering something about regrettable violence. Must really protest, but a single glance from Jadis, he became speechless. She drove him out of the room and out of the house, and Diggory came running down the stairs just to see the front door close behind them. "Jiminy," he said, "she's loose in London, and with Uncle Andrew. I wonder what on earth's going to happen now." "Oh, Master Diggory," said the housemaid, who really was having a wonderful day, "I think Miss Kettley's hurt herself somehow." So they both rushed into the drawing room to find out what had happened. If Aunt Letty had fallen on bare boards or even the carpet, I suppose all of her bones would have been broken. But by any great luck, she had landed on a mattress. Aunt Letty was a very tough old lady. Aunts often were in those days. And after she had had some salvolatile and sat for a few minutes, she said there was nothing the matter with her except a few bruises. Very soon she was taking charge of the situation. "Sarah," she said to the housemaid, who never had such a day before, "go around to the police station at once and tell them there is a dangerous lunatic at large, and I will take Mr. Kirk's lunch up myself." Mr. Kirk was, of course, Diggory's mother. Mrs. Kirk was, of course, Diggory's mother. When Mother's lunch had been seen to, Diggory and Aunt Letty left on their own. After that, he did some hard thinking. The problem was how to get the witch back to her own world, or, at any rate, out of ours, as soon as possible. Whatever happened, she must not be allowed to go rampaging around the house. Mother must not see her, and if possible, she must not be allowed to go rampaging around London either. Diggory had not been in the drawing room when she tried to blast Aunt Letty, but he had seen her blast the gates at Shan, so he knew of her terrible power, and did not know that she had lost any of them by coming into our world. and he knew she meant to conquer the world. At the present moment, as far as he could see, she might be blasting Buckingham Palace or the Houses of Parliament. It was almost certain that quite a number of policemen had probably been reduced to little heaps of dust. There didn't seem to be anything he could do about that. But the rings seemed to work like magnets, thought Diggory. If I can only touch her and then slip on my yellow, we shall both go into the wood between the worlds. I wonder, will she all faint again there? Was there something out of place that place does to her, or was it only the shock of being pulled out of her own world? But I suppose I'll have to risk that. How am I to find the beast? And I don't suppose Aunt Letty would let me go out, not unless I said where I was going, and I haven't got more than twopence. If I needed any money for buses or trams, if I went looking all over London. Anyways, I don't have the faintest idea where to look. I wonder if Uncle Andrew is still with her. It seemed in the end that the only thing he could do was wait and hope that Uncle Andrew and the witch would come back. And if they did, he must rush about and get hold of the witch and put on his yellow ring before she had a chance to get into the house. And that meant he must watch the front door like a cat watching a mouse's hole. He dared not leave his post for a moment, so he went into the dining room and glued his face to the window. It was a bow window from which you could see the steps up the front door and see up the street, with no one, so that no one could reach the front door without your knowing. I wonder what Polly's doing, thought Diggory. He wondered about this for a good deal as the first slow half-hour ticked on, but you need not wonder, for I'm going to tell you. She had got home for her dinner with her shoes and stockings very wet, and when they asked where she'd been and what on earth she'd been doing, she said she'd been out with Diggory Kirk. Under further questioning, she said she got her feet wet in a pool of water, and that the pool was in the wood, and when she was asked where the wood was, she said she didn't know. Asked if it was in one of the parks, she said truthfully enough that she supposed it might be in some sort of park. From all of this, Polly's mother got the idea that Polly had gone off without telling anyone to some strange part of London she didn't know, and gone into a strange park and amused herself by jumping in puddles. As a result, she was told that she had been very naughty indeed, and that she wasn't allowed to play with that Kirk boy anymore. And if any of that happened again, she would be in a lot of trouble. Then she was given dinner with all the nice parts left out, and sent to bed for 2 hours. It was a thing that happened to one quite often in those days. When Diggory was staring out of the dining room window, Polly was lying in bed, and both were thinking how terribly slowly the time could go. I think, myself, I would rather be in Polly's position. She only had to wait to the end of her 2 hours, but every minute Diggory would hear a cab or a baker's van or a butcher's boy coming round the corner and think, "Here she comes," and then find that it wasn't. And in between those false alarms, for what seemed like hours and hours, the clock ticked on, and one big fly, high and far out of reach, buzzed against the window. It was one of those houses that get very quiet and dull in the afternoon, and always seem to smell of mutton. During his long watching and waiting, one small thing happened which I shall have to mention, because something important came a bit later. A lady called with some gropes for Diggory's mother, and as the dining room door was open, Diggory couldn't help overhearing Aunt Letty and the lady as they talked in the hall. "What lovely grapes," came Aunt Letty's voice. "I'm sure if anything could do her good, these would. But poor dear little Mabel, I'm afraid it would need fruit from the land of youth to help her now. Nothing in this world will do so much." They both lowered their voices and said a lot more that he could not hear. If he had heard that bit about Land of Youth a few days ago, he would have thought that Aunt Letty was just talking without meaning anything in particular, you know, the way grown-ups do. But it wouldn't have interested him at all. But he almost thought so now. But suddenly it flashed into his mind that he knew, even if Aunt Letty didn't, that there really was other worlds, and he himself had been in one of them. At that rate, there might be a Land of Youth somewhere. There might be almost anything. There might be fruit in some other world that really could cure his mother. And well, you know how it feels when you begin hoping for something that you want desperately, badly. You almost fight against the hope because it's too good to be true. And you've been disappointed so often before. That was how Diggory felt. But it was no good trying to throttle his hope. It might, really, it might just be true. So many odd things had happened already. And he had the magic rings. There must be words you could get through every pool in the wood. He could hunt through them all. And then, well, Mother would be well again, and everything would be right. He forgot all about watching for the witch. His hand was already going into his pocket, where he kept the yellow ring. And all of a sudden, he heard the sound of galloping. Hello, what's that? Thought Diggory. Fire engine? I wonder what house is on fire. Great Scott! It's coming here. Why, it's her. I needn't tell you who he meant by her. First came Hanson. There was no one in the driver's seat. On the roof. First came the Hanson. There was no one in the driving seat. On the roof, not sitting but standing on the roof, swaying with superb balance as it came round the corner with one wheel in the air. So there's the Queen, the witch, and she's on this horse and cart, but she's not sitting in the carriage, she's standing on the roof. Was Jadis, the Queen of Queens and the terror of charm. Her teeth were bared and her eyes shone like fire. Her hair streamed out behind her like a comet's tail, and she was flogging the horse without mercy. Its nostrils were wide and red. Its sides were spotted with foam. It galloped madly up to the front door, missing the lamppost by an inch, and reared on its hind legs. The carriage crashed into the lamppost and shattered into several pieces. The witch, with a magnificent jump, landed on the horse's back. She settled herself and leaned forward, whispering things in its ear. They must have things meant not to be quiet, but to madden it. It was on its hind legs again in a moment. Its neigh was like a scream. It was all hooves and teeth and eyes and a tossing mane. Before Diggory had recovered his breath, a good many other things began to happen. A second carriage dashed up close behind, and out of there jumped a fat man and a policeman. And the third came, with more policemen in it, and then about 20 people on bicycles, all ringing their bells. And last of all came a crowd of people on foot, all very hot with running, but obviously enjoying themselves. Windows shot up in all the houses of the street, and a housemaid or a butler appeared at every window because they wanted to see the fun. Meanwhile, an old gentleman had begun to struggle shakily out of the ruins of the first carriage. Several people rushed forward to help him, but as one pulled him one way and one another, perhaps he would have got out as quickly on his own. Diggory guessed that the old gentleman must be Uncle Andrew, but you couldn't see his face, and his tall hat had been bashed down over it. Diggory rushed out and joined the crowd. "That's the woman! That's the woman!" cried the fat man, pointing at the witch. "Do your duty, constable. Hundreds and thousands of pounds she's taken out of my shop. Look at that rope of pearls round her neck. That's mine. And she's given me a black eye too, that's what's more." "That she has, governor," said one of the crowd. "And a lovely black eye, as I'd wish to see. Beautiful bit of work it must have been. Gaw, ain't she strong then?" "You ought to have a nice raw beefsteak on it, mister. That's what it wants," said a butcher's boy. "Now then," said the most important of the policemen, "what's all this here?" "I tell you, she..." began the fat man. But when someone else called out, "Don't let the old cove in the cab get away. He put her up to it." The old gentleman, who was certainly Uncle Andrew, had just been succeeding in standing up and was rubbing his bruises. "Now then," said the policeman, "what's all this?" "Waffle upon me shump," came Uncle Andrew's voice from inside the hat. "None of that now," said the policeman sternly. "You see, this is no laughing matter. Take that hat off, see? But this was more easily said than done, for after Uncle Andrew had struggled in vain with the hat for some time, 2 other policemen came and forced it by the brim and took it off. Thank you, said Uncle Andrew in a faint voice. Thank you, dear me. I'm terribly shaken. If someone could get me a small glass of brandy. Now, if you attend to me, if you please, said the policeman, taking out a very large notebook and a very small pencil. Are you in charge of that woman? Look out, called several voices. And the policeman jumped to step back just in time. The horse had aimed its kick at him and probably would have killed him. The witch wheeled the horse around so that she faced the crowd, and its hind legs were on the footpath. She had a strong, long, bright knife in her hand, and had been busy cutting the horse free from the wreck of the carriage. All this time, Diggory had been trying to get into a position to which he could touch the witch. This wasn't easy at all, because on the nearest side to him there were too many people, and in order to get round to the other side he had to pass between the horse's legs and the railings of the area that surrounded the house. For the Kettering's house had a basement, and if you know anything about horses, especially if you'd seen what state the horse was in, you'll know that this was a ticklish thing to do. Diggory knew a lot about horses, but he set his teeth and was about to make a dash for it as soon as he saw a good moment. A red-faced man in a bowler hat had now shouldered his way in front of the crowd. Hi, policeman! That's my horse she's sitting on, same as that's my cab that she's made matchwood of. One at a time, please, said the policeman. But there ain't no time, said the cabby. I know that horse better than you do. 'Tain't no ordinary horse. His father was an officer in charge of cavalry, and if the young woman goes all him on him, there'll be murder done. Here, let me get at him. The policeman was only too glad to have a good reason for standing further away from the horse. The cabby took a step nearer, looked up at the witch, and said in a not unkindly voice, Now, missy, let me get at it, it said, and you get off. You're a lady, and you don't want all these roughs going for you, do you? Now, you just gonna come and have a nice cup of tea and lay down quiet like, and then you'll feel so much better. At the same time, he stretched out his hand towards the horse's head with the words, Steady, Strawberry, old boy, steady then. And for the first time, the witch spoke. Dog, came her cold, clear voice, ringing loyal above all other noises. Dog, unhand our royal charger. We are the Empress Jadis. And that's the end of chapter 7. Chapter 8 will be soon. Thank you so much for watching.